that a person is appointed as a judge of the High Court, and then he resigns to take again tourism into the profession. He was appointed as one of the youngest judge from the Kerala. He resigned in 2009, and he has been an important part in various issues which are relevant for the purposes of adjudicating law. He had been associated with the Sabrimala case and the draft guidelines of POSCO, and then with the BH lawyers case, which was into the limelights. These are only the few, a bird eye view, but his association with law as a lawyer, as a judge, and thereafter again when he comes back to the profession is immense. Without taking much time, I request Mr. V. Giri to enrich us with the topic, which I'm quite sure that everyone would enjoy. I would not be wrong in citing that there was a movie, Andha Kanoon, which related with the facet of as to whether it could be done or not. That was way back when Mr. Amitabh Bachchan acted in that movie. Over to you, sir. And we are again obliged that you have accepted our invite.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on this webinar to speak on and therefore to learn on a subject which is of topical importance, and I would say that it recurs again and again. And it continues to be relevant in several.
Sir, could you come to this slightly left because you're on the extreme right? Some part of your body is cutting out.
This is it?
Yes, sir.
Is it okay?
Yes, sir.
The topic is double jeopardy, scope and ambit to the protection against double jeopardy. Therefore, we'll have to start with what is meant by double jeopardy as such. The moment you speak about double jeopardy, now you think about the constitutional protection that is afforded under Article 20 of the Constitution, Sub-Article 2, Article 20 of the Constitution. And you would be right in saying that these ambit of scope and ambit to the protection against the rule of double jeopardy will have to be primarily sourced to Article 22, because that's a fundamental right. But then the sweep of the protection against double jeopardy would be understood better if one goes to the other provisions of law as well. And that would primarily be Section 300 of the CRPC, because you get obviously the principle of double jeopardy or the protection against double jeopardy would be invoked in a case where in a criminal prosecution, and therefore Section 300 of the CRPC would always come in at the outset. And then you also have Section 71 of the Indian Penal Code. You have Section 26 of the General Clauses Act. Comprehensively, all these provisions would enable you to understand the scope and ambit of the protection under the protection against double jeopardy. Now, what does double jeopardy mean? Double jeopardy, and that's how the Supreme Court has understood it, and that double jeopardy or the rule against putting a person or subjecting a person to a double jeopardy is you cannot prosecute and punish a person twice over for the same offense. This is what is contemplated by Article 22. That you shall not prosecute and try him if he has already been convicted. You shall not prosecute and convict him again for the same offense. But then, like all other constitutional provisions, the constitutional protection is mentioned or is provided for in broad terms, and what exactly is the scope and ambit of the protection under Article 22. You will have to understand it not only by a reading of the provision, which is a fundamental right, but also reading the associated provisions in Part 3 of the Constitution, and more importantly, the provisions of the CRPC, and then Section 26 of the General Clauses Act and Section 71 of the Indian Penal Code. Considerable discussion will have to focus on Section 300 of the CRPC. And the first thing that you realize on a reading of Section 300 of the CRPC, once you have had a look at, say, Article 22 of the Constitution, is the constitutional protection against double jeopardy springs into or is available when a person is already convicted for one offense, and then you can't indict him, prosecute him, and convict him for the same offense all over again. This is how the constitutional protection reads. But when it comes to Section 300 of the CRPC, the protection is available even when a persons once convicted or acquitted not to be tried for the same offense. Therefore, the protection under Section 300 is available to a person who has once been tried by a court of competent jurisdiction for an offense and convicted or acquitted of such offense, shall, while such conviction or acquittal remain in force, not to be, he is not liable to be tried again for the same offense, nor on the same facts for any other offense for which a different charge from the one made against him might have been made under subsection 1 of Section 221, or which he might have been convicted under subsection 2 thereof. Therefore, you have to read Section 300 of the CRPC, you have to read it along with Section 221 and 221.1 and 221.2 of the CRPC. I'll come to that in a moment's time. But then one thing, therefore, it strikes you is that 22 affords you a protection against double jeopardy when you have already been convicted for an offense. Section 300 of the CRPC affords you a protection where you have been prosecuted for an offense, and irrespective of whether you have been convicted or even acquitted, you cannot be tried for the same offense all over again. Now, this, broadly speaking, is what is contemplated by the first part of Section 300 of the CRPC. But then you also have to look at the second part of Section 300(1) of the CRPC. And let me read it again. The second part says, and the first part therefore ends with saying, while such conviction or acquittal remains in force, not be liable to be tried again for the same offense, nor on the same facts, and this is where the second part begins, nor on the same facts for any other offense, for which a different charge from the one made against him might have been made under subsection 1 of Section 221, or for which he might have been convicted under subsection 2 thereof. Go to Section 221 immediately, because otherwise it is difficult to understand what the second part of Section 300 means. And if you come to Section 221, it will be advantageous if you read the illustrations under Section 221 also at the same time. Let me read Section 221 first. 221 of the CRPC, where it is doubtful what offense has been committed. If a single act or a series of acts is of such a nature that it is doubtful which of several offenses of acts which can be proved will constitute, the accused may be charged with having committed all or any of such offenses, and any number of such charges may be tried at once, or he may be charged in the alternative with having committed some one of the said offenses. Am I audible?
Perfect, sir. Perfect.
Just go to the first illustration. A is accused of an act which may amount to theft, or receiving stolen property, or criminal breach of trust or cheating. He may be charged with theft, receiving stolen property, criminal breach of trust and cheating, or he may be charged with having committed theft or receiving stolen property or criminal breach of trust or cheating. Therefore, suppose, as an example, suppose he is charged with theft, and he is not charged with receiving stolen property or criminal breach of trust and cheating, or he is not, in which case, if you come back to Section 300 and the illustration thereunder, A is tried upon a charge of theft as a servant and acquitted. he cannot afterwards, while the acquittal remains in force, be charged with theft as a servant or upon the same facts with theft simply or with criminal breach of trust. Point is, if you are tried for an offense, per se, and you have to give importance to the word offense, because that is where the Supreme Court has also considered the question of the scope and ambit of the protection against double jeopardy. On a set of facts, it constitutes an offense, and one is A is therefore charged with offense, the several offenses, 1, 2, or 3 or more offenses. He is convicted or he is acquitted. Even if he is acquitted, if he is charged with one offense, but if he could have been charged with the other offenses on the same set of facts under 221, because it says or nor on the same set of facts for any other offense for which a different charge from the one made against him might have been made under subsection 1 of section 221, or for which he might have been convicted under subsection 2 thereof. If we come back to section 221, subsection 2, what you get is, if in such a case the accused is charged with one offense and it appears in evidence that he committed a different offense for which he might have been charged under the provisions of subsection 1, he may be convicted of the offense which he is shown to have committed, although he was not charged with it. Come to the second illustration. Under 221(2), in the case mentioned first, that is where A is accused of an act which may amount to theft. In the case mentioned, A is only charged with theft. It appears that he committed the offense of criminal breach of trust or of that of receiving stolen goods. He may be convicted of criminal breach of trust or of receiving stolen goods as the case may be, though he was not charged with such offense. Therefore, the latter part of section 300, 1 of the CRPC would take in a case where he was charged with theft, but on the same set of facts, the magistrate would have framed the charge against him for criminal breach of trust or for receiving stolen property, but he was not. And then ultimately he was either convicted or acquitted. He then is entitled to the protection coming under the latter part of section 301, which says, while such conviction or acquittal remains in force, not be liable to be tried again for the same offense, nor on the same facts for any other offense for which a different charge from the one made against him might have been made under subsection 1 of section 221, or for which he might have been convicted under subsection 2 thereof. This is how, therefore, this is the broad ambit to the protection against double jeopardy, which is afforded under the section 300 of the CRPC. Now, it is on a conspectus of these provisions that the major decisions of the Supreme Court on double jeopardy have been rendered, and therefore a useful discussion on this principle of law and the manner in which it has been evolved or developed by the Supreme Court over the years can be made only if one looks at the major decisions on this point, and that is what I propose to do now at this stage. But let me just complete a reference to the relevant statutory provisions. I have taken you to Article 22, and thereafter one gets section 300 of the CRPC, which we have seen in some detail. But you also have to look at section 26 of the General Clauses Act, which says, where an act or omission constitutes an offense under 2 or more enactments, then the offender shall be liable to be prosecuted and punished under either or any of those enactments, but shall not be liable to be punished twice for the same offense. Please note, for the same offense. Then you get section 71 of the Indian Penal Code, which provides where anything which is an offense is made up of parts, any of which parts is itself an offense, the offender shall not be punished with a punishment of more than one of such of his offenses unless it be so expressly provided. Where anything is an offense falling within 2 or more separate definitions of any law in force for the time being, by which offenses are defined or punished, or where several acts of which one or more than one would by itself or themselves constitute an offense constitute, when combined, a different offense, the offender shall not be punished with a more severe punishment than the court which tries him could award for any one of such offences. Now, that is therefore, when he is tried for more than one offence because the act committed which he is charged with is made up of parts, any one of which part itself is an offence, the offender shall not be punished with the punishment of more than one of such of his offences unless it be so expressly provided. Therefore, it could be expressly provided that each of one would be a separate offence and he could be convicted. The question of sentence would arise separately because in most of these cases that depends upon the sentencing part which is covered by the provisions of the CRPC. Therefore, unless there are extremely compelling circumstances, the sentence of an imprisonment would normally run consecutively and not successively unless there are extremely compelling reasons for which the court will have to give reasons. But that's a different aspect. We are concerned with the question as to the scope and ambit of Section 71 of the APC, which you have just now read. But more on that at a later point of time. Now, the Supreme Court has, while considering Article 22 and Section 300 of the CRPC, stressed on the identity of the offences for which a person has been tried and convicted or acquitted tried at an earlier point of time, and the offence for which he is sought to be prosecuted on a subsequent occasion. Now, the contention which was raised at the earliest point of time on Article 22 of the CRPC was always on the basis of Article 22. Section 300 of the CRPC, the analogous section under the earlier code was Section 403. And Section 403 read differently. The manner in which am I okay? Am I visible now?
So yes. Slightly you can come on the left, you will come in the center of the camera.
Slightly?
Yes. Slightly more.
Okay, no, okay. The manner in which Section 300 has been worded now under the 73 code is different from how it was worded earlier under the 1890, under the earlier code. I don't immediately get the it was Section 403 of the earlier code. Section 403 read differently, and some of the earlier decisions on the question of double jeopardy, not under Article 22, but under the provisions of the CRPC, read differently. I'll come to one of the judgments which actually dealt with that, the Section 403 of the earlier CRPC at a slightly later point of time. The Supreme Court had considered Section 403 and therefore had rejected the plea of double jeopardy in that case. It might not have happened had Section 300 of the CRPC been available in the code at that point of time. But we'll come to that at a slightly later point of time, if you don't. Now, the earliest judgment of the point dealing with double jeopardy by the Supreme Court is what is termed as which is a judgment termed as a locus classicus on the subject called Maqbool Hussain versus State of Bombay, AR 1953, Supreme Court 325. Maqbool Hussain dealt with a case where certain persons were caught with smuggling goods, and they were initially, therefore, tried under the provisions of, tried means they were prosecuted under the provisions of the Sea Customs Act. And a heavy penalty was also imposed on them. The said proceedings came to an end in the sense that it became final. Now, subsequently, they were sought to be prosecuted for an offense under Section 120B of the Indian Penal Code, namely of a larger conspiracy. Now, the contention taken up was that on the same set of facts, these persons have already been punished, no doubt, for an offense which involves smuggling of goods. That has become final. Whether they paid the penalty or not is a different matter. But the point is, those proceedings became final. They were convicted. Now, on the same set of facts, how do you therefore prosecute them subsequently for an offense under the provisions of the Penal Code? Was it not a case where the principle of double jeopardy would arise under Article 22? This was the gist of the argument that was taken. Maqbool Hussain rested it under Article 22, but then interpreted the words in Article 22 to mean it is not the identity and the set of facts that was presented by the prosecution on the two occasions that is relevant to invoke Article 22, but identity of the offences. This is where it was laid down that in the first case it was an offence under the provisions of the Sea Customs Act, and on the second occasion, this was under the provisions of the Indian Penal Code, Section 120B and certain other sections as well. Now, the ingredients of the two offences are different, and therefore the Supreme Court came to the conclusion that the protection under Article 22 would therefore be available only when the person concerned is tried to be prosecuted the second time around for the same offence. Therefore, what is relevant for the purpose of Article 22 would be the identity of the offences, the first offence being the one for which he was convicted, and the second offence for one which he was sought to be prosecuted and tried on the second occasion. Now, Maqbool Hussain was thereafter relied on in several other judgments, though with different set of facts as such. And I'll refer you to some of the major judgments on that point. Please come to, let me take you in the chronological order. And you have 1954 SCR 1150, the nominal citation being S.A. Venkatraman versus Union of India. Now, in Venkatraman, the petitioner was sought to be prosecuted. Petitioner was he was a member of the Indian Civil Service, and he was employed as a secretary to the Ministry of Commerce and Industries of the Government of India. Certain imputations of misbehavior while holding offices of various descriptions of the Government of India came to the notice of the central government, and on being satisfied that there were prima facie good reasons for making an inquiry, directed a formal...
Sir, sorry, kindly keep the page down, otherwise we are live on the Facebook.
Okay. Directed a formal and public inquiry to be made as to the truth or falsity of the allegations made against the petitioner in accordance with the provisions of the Public Servants Enquiries Act of 1850. Now, please note that the substance of the imputations were drawn up in the form of a specific charges, and an ex-Chief Justice of the High Court was appointed a commissioner under Section 3 of the said Act to conduct the inquiry and report to the government. And as a result of the same, his opinion on several articles of charge formulated against the petitioner. The order of the central government directing the inquiry, drawn under Section 6, heads with various subheads under each one of them, and the details of the charges are mentioned by the Supreme Court in paragraph 2. The inquiry proceeded in the manner laid down under the Public Servants Enquiries Act. Charges were read out to the petitioner, and his plea of not guilty was formally recorded, Evidence was adduced by the prosecutor. Defense and the witnesses were examined. And I'll skip the. Thereafter, the commissioner found on a consideration of the evidence that 4 of the charges under various subheads were proved against the petitioner and submitted a report to the effect to the government on 4th of May, and the government thereafter complied with Article 311, and subsequently a final order was passed by which his services were terminated. Now, where Article 22 would arise is, subsequently, the police submitted a charge sheet against him before the Special Judges Sessions Court, Delhi, charging with offences under Section 161, 165 of the Penal Code and Section 52 of the Prevention of Corruption Act. And it was when he was charged in that regard that he raised the plea of double jeopardy, and 2 contentions were considered. One is the commissioner who held an inquiry against him under the provisions of the Public Inquiries Act was no less than a former Chief Justice of the Calcutta High Court. But point is, it was a judicial inquiry, and ultimately the punishment imposed on him was a dismissal from service. It was a full-fledged inquiry that was conducted by a person appointed under the statute who was competent to do so, and therefore it ended with the dismissal of him from the services. Article 22 was invoked on the ground that he has already suffered because an inquiry was held against him and a punishment of dismissal from service has already been imposed, and therefore he cannot be tried for the same charges on the same set of facts. Facts were the same. There were 6 different charges in the inquiry that was conducted in the Public Inquiries Act. On the same set of facts, he was sought to be prosecuted under 161, 165, and for the provisions of the Prevention of Corruption Act before the competent sessions judge. That is when this plea was invoked, and this is how the Supreme Court dealt with it. And in the subsequent judgments also, Maqbool Hussain and Venkatraman have been laid on. Venkatraman is relevant for the purpose of the second limb of the contention, which I'll come to in a moment. But this is how Maqbool Hussain has been understood in Venkatraman. The scope and meaning of the guarantee implied in Article 22 of the Constitution has been indicated with sufficient fullness in the pronouncement of this court in Maqbool Hussain versus State of Bombay. The roots of the principle which this clause enacts are to be found in the well-established rule of English law, which finds expression in the maxim, nemo debet vix vexari, a man who must not be put twice in peril for the same offence. If a man is indicted again for the same offence in an English court, he can plead as a complete defence his formal acquittal or conviction, or as it is technically expressed, take the plea of auto fi acquit or auto fi convict, which means a previous acquittal or a previous conviction, as the case may be. The corresponding provision in the Federal Constitution of the USA is contained in the 5th Amendment, which provides inter alia, nor shall any person be subjected for the same offence to be put twice in jeopardy of life and limb. This principle has been recognized and adopted by the Indian legislature and is embodied in the provisions of Section 26 of the General Clauses Act and Section 403 of the Criminal Procedure Code. Although these were the materials which form the background of the guarantee or the fundamental right given in Article 22 of the Constitution, the ambit and contents of the guarantee, as this court pointed out in the case referred to above, that is Maqbool Hussain, are much narrower than those of the common law rule in England or the doctrine of double jeopardy in the American Constitution. Article 22 of our Constitution, it is to be noted, does not contain the principle of auto fi acquit at all. It seems this is where auto fi acquit is a previous acquittal. This is where the scope and ambit against double jeopardy, as it were, is much broadened when it comes to Section 300 of the CRPC. 300 of the CRPC as it stands in 1973 code. It seems that our constitution makers did not think it necessary to raise one part of the common law rule to the level of a fundamental right and thus make it immune from legislative interference. This is where it has been changed when the code has been amended in 1973. This has been left to be regulated by the general law of the land in order to enable a citizen to invoke the protection of clause 2 of Article 20 of the Constitution. There must have been both prosecution and punishment in respect to the same offense. The words prosecuted and punished are to be taken not distributively so as to mean prosecuted or punished, which means that it is not to be read alternatively. It is to be, it's where the 322 would be available only when he is prosecuted and punished. It is not enough if he is simply prosecuted and then acquitted. He must be prosecuted and punished for the same offense. Both the factors must coexist in order that the operation of the clause may be attractive. The position is also different under the American Constitution. There, the prohibition is not against a second punishment, but against a peril in which a person may be placed by reason of a valid indictment being presented against him before a competent court, followed by a proper arraignment and a plea and a lawful impaneling of the jury. It is not necessary to have a verdict at all. This is so. But let me just, I'll give you the citation later of the US Supreme Court. Actually, for the offense of holding a firearm, which is a felony, a person was tried and convicted for an offense, for a suitable offense under the state law. But he was thereafter sought to be prosecuted by the United States of America, by the federal government itself, on the same set of facts, or maybe the substratum of the facts were the same. He took a plea of jeopardy, and thereafter the US Supreme Court went on to hold, with reference to the Fifth Amendment itself, that look here, holding a firearm is a felony under the Alabama law, but it is also an offense under the federal law. It so happened that way. I think thereafter protection has been afforded subsequently, but the identity of the offense was what was considered to be relevant, even for the offense, even for the plea under the Fifth Amendment to the American Constitution. If you look at Article 22, and if you also look at thereafter the provisions under Section 300 of the CRPC, how the Supreme Court has analyzed it, the same set of facts can constitute the basis for the different offenses. And it could be an offense under one enactment, it could also be an offense, the same set of facts could turn out to be an offense under another enactment. And unless it is a case where the latter part of 221(2) of the CRPC applies, where he could have been charged with this offense also simultaneously when he was prosecuted for the first time, it's not a case where the plea of double jeopardy would be available when a person is sought to be prosecuted the second time for an offense which is different in its ingredients from the offense for which he was prosecuted and convicted or acquitted, as the case may be, in the first time. Therefore, what is crucial in considering the plea of Article 22, the plea is available only when there is a conviction for an offense, prosecution and conviction. 300 is available when he is prosecuted, whether he is convicted or acquitted. That is immaterial when it comes to the question of raising the plea or the protection under Section 300 of the CRPC. But what is relevant is the identity of the offenses. And this principle has been consistently laid down by the Supreme Court. I'll just go to the next paragraph in Venkatraman. It has been held by this court in Maqbool Hussain case that the language of Article 20 and the words actual use in it afford a clear indication that the proceedings in connection to the prosecution and punishment of a person must be in the nature of a criminal proceeding before a court of law or judicial tribunal, and not before a tribunal which entertains a department or an administrative inquiry, even though set up by the statute, but which is not required by law to try a matter judicially under legal evidence. In that case, the proceedings were taken under the Sea Customs Act before a customs authority who ordered confiscation of goods. It was held that such proceedings were not prosecution, nor the order of confiscation of punishment within the meaning of Article 22, inasmuch as the customs authorities was not a court or a judicial tribunal, and merely exercised administrative powers vested in him for revenue purposes. The facts of this case are no doubt different, and the point that requires determination is whether the petitioner can be said to have satisfied all the conditions that are necessary to enable him to claim the protection under Article 22. The changes upon which the petitioner is being charges upon which the petitioner is being prosecuted now are charges under Section 161 and 165 of the Penal Code and 5(2) of the Prevention of Corruption Act. We will assume for our present purposes that the allegations upon which these charges are based are substantially the same, which form the subject matter of inquiry under the Public Servants Inquiries Act. The question narrows down to this: whether the petitioner had already been prosecuted and punished for these offences. Thereafter, the discussion is held, and on two grounds, a plea of double jeopardy is negative. The relevant discussion comes about in paragraph 15 of the judgment. No, not necessary for me to read the whole thing, but let me just indicate that the decision of the Supreme Court was rested on two grounds. One, the commissioner under the Public Inquiries Act was not a tribunal, was not a court, and therefore the plea of prosecution and punishment which is necessary on the first occasion is not available, and therefore Article 22 cannot be invoked. The second is the offences are different, and this is what is relevant when it comes to the subsequent judgments on the point. Because obviously now Article 20, the plea of protection against double jeopardy is not restricted to Article 22. It is in extremely exceptional cases that one actually would come across a case which might satisfy the plea under Article 22. But Section 300 of the CRPC is obviously invoked much more frequently. And Section 300 of the CRPC, as I told you, broadens the scope and ambit of the protection against double jeopardy in a very significant way as such. Now, Venkatraman and other decisions on that point, I'll just give you the citation because I don't think it would be appropriate to take you to the facts of the several other judgments which have considered both Maqbool Hussain and Venkatraman. But please note the citation if you are interested. The next one would be 2003 3 SEC 362. I'm sorry, I left out 1961 3 SCR 107, State of Bombay versus SL Apte. Then Assistant Collector of Customs versus LR Melwani, 1969 2 SCR 438. In the first case, 1961 3 SCR 107, that is Apte. The equivalent citation is AR 1961 Supreme Court 578. In the second case, it is 1969 2 SCR 438. The equivalent citation is AR 1970 Supreme Court 962. Now, the 61 3 SCR 107, that is Apte's case, would require a slightly detailed consideration in our context, because it also considered Section 403 of the CRPC as it then stood. And 403 of the CRPC read as 403(2) of the CRPC. It was subsequently replaced by Section 300 of the CRPC. 403(2) read as a person acquitted or convicted of any offence may be afterwards tried for any distinct offence for which a separate charge might have been made against him on the former trial under Section 235 subsection 1. Now, please note the difference that has come about in Section 300 of the CRPC now. Earlier, 403(2) of the CRPC says a person acquitted or convicted of any offence may be afterwards tried for any distinct offence for which a separate charge might have been made against him on the former trial under Section 235 subsection 1. Now, reference is made under section 300 of the CRPC to section 221(1) and 221(2) of the CRPC. And in 221(1), charges could be framed by the magistrate against a person on the same set of facts for different offences, if it were possible to do so. If it were possible to do so in the sense that under the same set of facts, a person could be charged. In the illustration given, it is for theft, misappropriation, or receiving stolen property. For the same set of facts, if charges could be framed against these three offences, the protection against double jeopardy, as contemplated by the latter part of section 300 of the CRPC, would apply, because it is a case where suppose he could be charged with these offences on the same set of facts and charges could have been framed, or on the same set of facts on the evidence, he could have been convicted for any one of those offences under the latter part of section 221(2) of the CRPC. Then also the protection against double jeopardy would now be available, going by the latter part of section 300 of the CRPC. This is how the wording of the analogous section under the previous code, 403(2), was substantially different. And therefore, when you have a look at the earlier judgments of the Supreme Court under section 300 of the CRPC, you should keep in mind the manner in which the section was worded, analogous section was worded under the previous Code of Criminal Procedure. And at any rate, the protection against double jeopardy in these circumstances for the offences under the Penal Code will always have to be read in the context of section 300, independent of, or I would say, associate, apart from the protection under Article 22, which is available only in a case where there was a previous prosecution and conviction as such. Now, Apte dealt with a case where, in Apte, the Supreme Court was dealing with a case and significantly dealt with a case for an original prosecution under the provisions of section 409 of the Penal Code. Para 3, both the respondents before the Supreme Court, the facts were, these were misappropriation of certain funds, essentially defalcation and so. They were employed in an insurance company. Both the respondents were thereupon prosecuted for an offence under section 409 of the Penal Code and also for an offence under section 105 of the Indian Insurance Act. The learned magistrate convicted and sentenced both the respondents for both the offences with which they were charged. The respondents thereupon filed appeals to the Court of the Sessions Judge Pune, and the learned Sessions Judge, by his order dated 3rd of May 1954, while confirming the conviction and sentence of the respondents under section 409 of the Penal Code, set aside the conviction under section 105 of the Indian Insurance Act. The reason for the latter order was a finding of the learned Sessions Judge that the sanction required by section 107 of the Indian Insurance Act, which was a prerequisite for the initiation of the prosecution under 105, had not been obtained before the complaint in respect thereof had been filed. The conviction and sentence under section 409 of the Penal Code, which had been affirmed by the Sessions Judge in both the cases, have now become final. Therefore, they were convicted under section 409 of the Indian Penal Code. The conviction became final. Though they were charged for an offence under 105 of the Insurance Act on the same set of facts, the conviction was set aside, essentially because a requisite sanction under the special statute was not available. Thereafter, the sanction was obtained and they were sought to be prosecuted again under the provisions of the Insurance Act. And then the plea of double jeopardy was taken under Article 22. The court considered Article 22, Section 26 of the CRPC, and also Section 405 of the Indian Penal Code, which deals with dishonest misappropriation, which deals with misappropriation or defalcation of funds. The offence under Section 105 of the Insurance Act was also therefore considered, for which a subsequent prosecution was laid. Now the point is, I don't think I have the time, or nor do you have the time. I'm sorry, I have the time, but you don't have the time to go through these decisions elaborately, but I commend this for your reading if you are seriously considering a study of the subject on double jeopardy. You will come across the discussion is contained in paragraphs 12 to 15 of the judgment. Thereafter, you pay attention to paragraph 18 and 19, and ultimately, the court held that the offence under section 409 of the Penal Code is different from the offence under section 105 of the Insurance Act. That the earlier conviction under provisions of the earlier, not an acquittal on merits, but the conviction was set aside because the sanction was not obtained. But since the sanction was not obtained, the conviction under 105 of the Insurance Act was set aside. But that did not bar a second prosecution under the provisions of the Insurance Act on the same set of facts because the offences were distinct and different. Ultimately, the decision of the Supreme Court was rested on this. Offences were distinct and different. And in paragraph 18, reference was made to section 403 of the CRPC as it stood in the earlier code. This is where I believe, or this is my humble opinion, that the opinion of the Supreme Court would have been different. Obviously, if section 300 of the CRPC as is now available in the code was there in the earlier code, which said that if you could have framed a charge, the question of a sanction was may not have arisen, that may not arise in even if section 300 of the CRPC is applicable. But the question is this: if you could have framed a charge under the offence when he was prosecuted the first time, but he was not, then the latter part of section 300 of the CRPC would come into the aid of the accused if he is prosecuted the second time for an offence. Point is this: for which offence a charge could have been framed by the magistrate even when he was prosecuted the first time. There, section 403(2) of the CRPC, as it then stood, that is prior to the 1973 CRPC, permitted the court to do so. Now, section 300 of the CRPC, the latter part of it, by referring to section 221(1) and 221(2), would stand in the way of the court doing so. Now, the Apte therefore rested on this. The other judgment which I said, I don't want to take up your time again going through a detailed discussion of this, but Apte, no, but the second judgment, that is Assistant Collector of Customs Melwani, relied on Maqbool Hussain and Apte, and ultimately came to the same view. And I would commend this for your reading also, especially because I just would be content with, I would request you to be content with, for the present, by a reading of a passage from Sambashivan versus Public Prosecutor, Federation of Malay, and a passage of a judgment from Lord McDermott, which has been relied upon by the Lordships of the Supreme Court in Melwani in paragraph 9. I cannot but read it because the manner in which, the felicity with which it has been expressed. The effect of a verdict of acquittal pronounced by a competent court on a lawful charge, and after a lawful trial, is not completely stated by saying that the person acquitted cannot be tried again for the same offence. To that, it must be added that the verdict is binding and conclusive in all subsequent proceedings with the parties, between the parties to the adjudication. The maxim res judicata pro verite acceptor is no less applicable to criminal than to civil proceedings. Here, the appellant having been acquitted of the first trial on the charge of having ammunition in his possession, the prosecution was bound to accept the correctness of that verdict and was precluded from taking any step to challenge it at the second trial. The appellant was no less entitled to rely on the acquittal insofar as it might be relevant in his defense. That it was not conclusive of his innocence on the firearm charge is plain, but it undoubtedly reduced in some degree the weight of the case against him. For at the first trial, the facts proved in support of one charge were clearly relevant to the other, having regard to the circumstances in which the ammunition and revolver were found and the fact that they fitted against each other. Then the Supreme Court holds, the rule laid down in that decision was adopted by this court in Pritham Singh. But before an accused can call into aid the above rule, he must establish that in a previous lawful trial before a competent court, he has secured a word of acquittal which verdict is binding on his prosecution. In the instant case, then the court then goes into the fact that the earlier trial was under the Customs Act, and therefore that may not be relevant. But this passage is again referred to by the Supreme Court in a subsequent case, where the Supreme Court says that an acquittal or even a conviction for an offense in a first trial, suppose the second trial is for a distinct offense, then the section the 300 of the CRPC also doesn't apply, then the plea of double jeopardy may not be applicable. But this issue was considered in the context of what is called as an issue estoppel. What I found interesting was that issue estoppel is normally taken as a relevant plea or as a considerable plea, though it is not a plea on substantive law, but it is a plea which has the potential to be treated as a plea of substantive law. But it is a plea, and it is a plea which can be taken to defend a trial on an issue on a subsequent occasion in civil proceedings. But the question of issue estoppel as such is not taken up in criminal proceedings as such, but where the Supreme Court says is that the previous proceedings may not constitute a res judicata when it comes to a subsequent different trial for a different offense, because obviously there is no res judicata in this. But how does issue estoppel arise? Issue estoppel would arise where there is an issue which arose for consideration in the earlier trial, and there is a finding of fact by the court which has become final. Now, that finding of fact cannot be disturbed or even reappreciated by the court, even a superior court on a subsequent occasion. If the finding of fact, the court is in a position to come to a conclusion that the accused has committed an offense, the second offense also, the court is at liberty to pass an appropriate order. But suppose there is a finding of fact on a particular occasion, and in the earlier proceedings, it had either ended in a conviction or in an acquittal, that finding of fact would bind the prosecution when it comes to even trial of a distinct offense on a subsequent occasion. That is on the plea of issue estoppel, which the Supreme Court had developed on a later occasion. But on facts, that plea was overruled. I'll give you the citation at a slightly later point in time. The one other judgment where this plea, I think I have cited Venkatraman, Apte, and Melvani, major judgments on that point. I would also thereafter, I think it is appropriate to take you to another judgment of the Supreme Court in 2003, 3 SCC 362, State of Haryana versus Balwant Singh, where the court considered the plea of double jeopardy with reference to the provisions of, I mistook the citations. I committed a mistake. I'll take it to the question of double jeopardy was taken up and considered, and there was a conspectus of all these earlier judgments on the point. In another judgment of, in a subsequent judgment by Justice Lahoti, yes, I have the citation. It is in State of Rajasthan versus Hutsing and others, 2003 2 SCC 152, where there was a conspectus of the relevant statutory provisions and also the constitutional provisions, and a conspectus of the major decisions on the point. And ultimately, Justice Lahoti came to the conclusion, there's a very detailed discussion on this, came to the conclusion or reiterated the principle that the offenses will have to be identical. Therefore, the question as to whether it is not, what is relevant is not the same set of facts for the plea of double jeopardy to be successfully invoked. What is relevant is not the same set of facts. What is relevant is the identity of the offenses. If you are prosecuted for one offense, not merely on the question of section 300 of the CRPC, but if you are prosecuted for one offense and you have either been convicted or acquitted as a case may be, you cannot be prosecuted for the same offense, even if the nomenclature is different, but if the ingredients of the offense are the same. Well, what the Supreme Court says is that if the ingredients of the offense are the same, then you cannot prosecute him later. Whether you have successfully prosecuted him on an earlier occasion, or he has been acquitted, as the case. Now, on a slightly different aspect, but where the plea of double jeopardy has been again negative, is the judgment in Monica Bedi versus State of Andhra Pradesh, 2011 1 ACC 284. A person was prosecuted and convicted for holding a fake passport by the courts in Lisbon. Thereafter, she was prosecuted for, she and others, the accused were prosecuted for under the provisions of the Passports Act and also for the provisions of the Penal Code. And the contention taken up was that there is double jeopardy. After all, I have been convicted for the offences. For the same set of facts, I have been convicted for the offence for holding a fake passport in Lisbon, in Portugal. Therefore, you can't try me again. The Supreme Court considered it from the angle of identity of offences, and then said that there is inadequate material to come to the conclusion that the ingredients of the offences for which the person was convicted and sentenced in Lisbon are the same as the offences for which she is thought to be prosecuted, that is under the provisions of the Penal Code and under the provisions of the Passports Act, and therefore held that the plea of double jeopardy is not available. There is also an indication, though I don't think I'm not confident enough to say, that the Supreme Court took it to the extent that, or Supreme Court was also saying that a conviction under another jurisdiction for the same offense or for an offense where the ingredients are the same would be sufficient to successfully resist a prosecution for a similar offense under the provisions of the Penal Code in India. Supreme Court did not lay down a principle to that effect, but on facts it was held that the materials are different. And thereafter went on to hold materials are inadequate, that the offences are different, and thereafter went on to hold that Article 22 of the Constitution is not available as such. That is Monica Bedi. The more relevance, or I would say of some relevance to practicing lawyers in the present day circumstances would be the plea of double jeopardy that has been raised in the conspectus of offense under Section 138 of the Negotiable Instruments Act and Section 420 of the Penal Code. There was one judgment of the Supreme Court in which this plea, though not under Article 22, but under Section 300 of the CRPC was accepted. And that is Kolla Veera Raghava Rao versus Venkateshwara Rao, 2011 2 ACC 703. There, the judgment is quite brief, and the discussion also doesn't seem to be quite elaborate. But that was a case where the appellant before the Supreme Court was convicted under Section 130 of the Negotiable Instruments Act, and hence, when he was sought to be prosecuted later for an offence under Section 420 of the CRPC, of the IPC, the plea under Section 20, Article 22 of the Constitution was taken, along with the plea under Section 301. The Supreme Court only said, refer to Article 22, where it says no person shall be prosecuted and punished for the same offence under the more than once, and then refers to extracts Section 300 of the CRPC, and the discussion is only this. Thus, it can be seen that Section 301 of the CRPC is wider than Article 22 of the Constitution, while Article 22 of the Constitution only states that no person shall be prosecuted and punished for the same offence more than once. Section 301 of the CRPC states that no one can be tried and convicted for the same offence, or even for a different offence but on the same facts. This finding seems to be not consistent with what the Constitution Bench has held in Malwani, Apte, Maqbul Hussain, and in the others of the Constitution Bench, Venkatraman. It's not the identity of the facts which is relevant, it is the identity of the offences. In the present case, although the offences are different, but the facts are the same. Hence, section 301 of the CRPC applies. Consequently, the prosecution under 420 of the IPC was barred under section 301, and therefore the prosecution was quashed. It was a 482 before the High Court, which was dismissed. But in Supreme Court, the Supreme Court allowed the criminal appeal. Now, a different view was taken by the Supreme Court itself in the context of a prosecution under section 420 of the IPC after having undergone an earlier prosecution under section 130 of the Negotiable Instruments Act, and that was in 212(7) SEC 621, Sangeeta Ben versus State of Gujarat. Now, Kolla Veera Raghav was also referred to, but in para 35 of the judgment, in Sangeeta Ben, the Supreme Court merely says, this court quashed the criminal proceeding, that is in Kolla Veera Rao, observing that it would amount to the abuse of process of law. In fact, the issue as to whether the ingredients of both the offences were the same had neither been raised nor decided. Therefore, the ratio of the judgment does not have application on the facts of the case. The strength of the judges were the same. Both were two-judge bench judgments. Sangeeta Ben takes a diametrically opposite view from Kolla Veera Rao. Let me also tell you that it is Sangeeta Ben which is being subsequently followed by the Supreme Court whenever the question of a subsequent prosecution under the offence under Indian Penal Code is taken by a person who has already faced a prosecution for the offence under section 130 of the Negotiable Instruments Act, and either the matter is pending in appeal against a conviction or an acquittal in a separate court. But in almost all the cases, it has arisen in the context of plea under section 482 of the Code of Criminal Procedure for quashing the subsequent prosecution. But where Kolla Veera Rao has gone wrong, if I may say so with respect, is that the question is to be considered in the context of identity of the offences and not identity on the same set of facts. Therefore, I think it would be safer to go by an elaborate discussion and the dictum that is laid down in Sangeeta Ben when it comes to and I think that comes up repeatedly in on more occasions than one in different courts. In which case, I think what is relevant is that the subsequent the Sangeeta Ben seems to be more on the point. There is also one other judgment which I would comment itself for your reading. That is in State of Mizoram versus Sanghina, 2019-13 SEC 335, where the Supreme Court did not lay down any principle that was new, but it is of some importance in the sense that a prosecution under the provisions of the PC Act, Prevention of Corruption Act, was originally quashed due to lack of sanction. Sanction was subsequently obtained, which is not always done. And then there was a success, then there was a prosecution, second prosecution, and then the plea of double jeopardy was taken. It was rightly turned down because the question of the person being discharged on account of an absence of a valid sanction, which can happen, it can happen in acquittal also. I'm not saying that there can be, when there is an invalid sanction, it can only be a discharge. No. The question of absence or the question of sanction could be taken even when trial commences. There can be an acquittal where the court says that this is one of the points on which the court finds that he cannot be convicted, and therefore the invalid sanction could also be there. But in such cases, it is doubtful whether the court would go into the merits of the matter, but that is irrelevant. That is immaterial, because whether it's conviction or the acquittal, section 300 of the CRPC would definitely apply. But the point is this: Supreme Court has held that if there is a discharge on account of an invalid sanction, it doesn't bar a second prosecution for the same offences under the Prevention of Corruption Act, because Article 22 definitely doesn't apply because there is no previous conviction. Section 300 of the CRPC also doesn't apply because the matter has not gone to a trial. It was discharged in the first occasion because of an invalid sanction. Now, that is also I believe, this is also an important judgment because the plea of 300 of the CRPC was taken up in that case and negative on the ground that it is not available. I have hopefully dealt with a fair degree with a comprehensive plea on this subject. There could be other points, definitely. By no means do I claim that I have done a complete research on this. And I would be happy if there is some contribution by anybody else who is actually, no, but if there is anybody who can.
So then in that case, since we have muted everyone, if anybody wants to give his opinion, then he will have to post on the chat that he wants to express some opinion.
Fair enough. Please go ahead.
Same would be in the questions. If somebody wants that he should be unmuted, he can raise that. But be that as it may, people are posting the questions on the chat. We are reading that. Himanshu Panda. If a person enters a house for theft and there he did murder too, then in this case, no, that is an expression. If a public servant is acquitted by a competent court due to lack of evidence, but accused found guilty by disciplinary proceedings, can the accused take a plea that double jeopardy cannot be done?
No. Double jeopardy doesn't apply. In fact, that is what that public servant's case, Venkatraman clearly dealt with, though it was a reverse fact situation. But it has been subsequently considered in another judgment also. The department proceedings are different. 22 and 300 of the CRPC would apply only in the context of criminal proceedings as such. Double jeopardy means no person shall be vexed twice, and therefore what is relevant is the same offence. Departmental proceedings is never for an offence, as it is contemplated in criminal law. Department proceedings are for disciplinary action, and even if therefore the proceedings are he is what discharge of the proceedings, or not even discharge. Let me use a word. If no proceeding, he is not punished in department proceedings. He could still be prosecuted for an offence under the Prevention of Corruption, subject to compliance with other statutory requirements as such, including valid sanction and so on.
Achnit Jain, given a hypothetical situation where the complainant withdraws their complaints leading to acquittal of the accused, can plea of double jeopardy be raised by the same accused during the prosecution for a complaint raised by another aggrieved by the same offence?
Withdrawal of a complaint?
He says it's there's a complainant withdraws her complaint. Probably he wants to say that there are two complainants. One which withdraws the complaint. Can another complaint be filed on the same issue?
Sorry, there's no clarity on facts.
I can ask.
Because hypothetically, a second complaint would be a complaint, not a second complaint, but a different complaint by a different complainant would be maintainable. Are we speaking about a case where the first complaint is by a private person and the second complaint is by the state?
Both by the private persons. He's saying that let's assume there are two complainants and one withdraws it and subsequently the second wants to pursue it.
On the same complaint? Or different complaint?
According to him, defense. I can unmute that person. Achnit Jain. Meanwhile, Kajal Chand says, except that section Article 20, subclause 2 provides prosecuted and punished, and section 300 provides acquitted or convicted. Is there any other point or difference between Article 20, subclause 2 and section 300 of CRPC?
But this is a major distinction. Convicted and punished, convicted or acquitted is not available under 22.
Yeah,
whether there is a conviction or acquittal, that's the plea which is available under section 300. But more importantly, the latter part of section 300 contemplates a situation where he could have been charged for that offence also. The second offence at the earlier point of time, when he was charged, when charges were framed against him on the first occasion.
So,
in which case, subject to compliance with 221(1) and 221(2), the plea of double jeopardy or against double jeopardy would be available.
So there's Jeevan T. Charles. We are unmuting her because the question is quite long. Jeevan, G-W-E-N. Meanwhile, if anybody wants to ask a question. Jeevan, Charles.
Hi, sir.
Hello.
Okay. Based on some fictional works and recent decisions of Honorable Supreme Court, I framed a hypothetical situation which may have possibility of arising in future. A was arrested for murdering B, and A was charged with section 302 of IPC. But the body of B was not recovered. That is, there is absence of corpus delicti. And in 2019, in the case of Sanjay Rajak versus the state of Bihar, the Supreme Court held that the failure of the police to recover the dead body of the victim will not by itself render the prosecution case doubtful, entitling to the accused to acquittal on benefit of doubt. And it is only one of the relevant factors to be considered along with all the circumstances to arrive at a finding based on reasonability and probability. That is, Supreme Court uphold the conviction without corpus delicti, in the absence of corpus delicti. And the same decision was also held in Ramanand versus state of Himachal Pradesh. So in my situation, in this hypothetical situation, A was convicted and punished for murdering B. And after 14 years of imprisonment, the government had set him free after the punishment. And interestingly, B was not dead and B returned back. And now A intentionally killed B. Whether A can be punished for killing B this time, or will A get the protection of double jeopardy?
The first time around it was a wrongful conviction. But the offense which took place subsequently is a different matter altogether. He can be prosecuted. He can't say that it is double jeopardy. I believe he could be prosecuted. It may not be possible for him to claim double jeopardy here.
Right, sir. So there are no questions because you have explained it so elucidatedly. Question is that we all start, as we say, they were all dots in the mind as to how there could be the double jeopardy, the scope and ambit of protection. But the way you connected the dots, in fact, it became a line to the effect that the concepts and conceptualization of the scope of double jeopardy has been explained in a subtle and simple manner. We are all obliged. Since we are the knowledge partners with Symbiosis Law School, Pune, we have Garima Pawar. I will ask a formal vote of thanks from her. And tomorrow we have a webinar by Justice Mushtaq. Garima ma'am, we have unmuted you.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, sir. It was such an enriching experience for students and for me as a participant. On behalf of Symbiosis Law School, Pune, and our director, Dr. Sashikala Gurpur, I would like to thank you for such a knowledgeable lecture and the session that you had conducted. And for me, since it was a new experience because you discovered about the scope of section 300 of CRPC, how it is broader from the inception till the latest judgment of 2019. Not many people have dealt so much in detail. I'm highly obliged that you took this session for us. Also, sir, on a very different note, students and including me, I'm very motivated that we should read judgments because we could understand the intent of a judgment only through reading and all. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. The show is mine.
Sir, and tomorrow we have session by Justice A. Muhammad Mushtaq again with a Symbiosis Law Schools. Tomorrow at 5 p.m. He's a sitting judge from your Kerala High Court itself.
Yes, very erudite judge, who's also a doctor, who also holds a doctorate in information technology.
Right.
Yes, he has done a course abroad from a university in Paris much earlier. a very erudite man, and speak authoritatively on. What is he speaking on?
So tomorrow he's speaking on, just hold on. So he's law, judicial process and justice.
Law, judicial process and justice.
Justice, yes.
You can also persuade him to speak on his favorite subject on.
So he has said that first topic I will take this one. Then in fact he had given me 3 topics. Then he said that we will go along with the second session and third session.
Because he is one person who can authoritatively speak on digitization of courts, including, he knows the technology quite well. You can speak to him later, and then find of great help to several.
So probably he's in the committee also.
He is the chairman of the E Committee in the Kerala High Court.
When Justice Chandrachud,
he is a part of the E Committee formed at the national level, but a person who knows the technology. And not only few judges have dealt with the technology at a hands-on level. Justice Mushtaq has done.
Yes.
Can I also take 1 minute? I want to acknowledge firstly, I want to thank you for giving me a platform to speak on.
It's other way around. Knowledge has just flown. And right, sir, he's an expert.
There was this junior of mine, chamber junior, called Muthucharan Sundaraj. He has done a lot of work on this. He has spent a lot of time in doing the necessary research and giving me the materials to speak on this.
So if he's here, we
I
can.
think it is only appropriate that I think he must be as part of this webinar now.
So what is his name?
Muthucharan Sundaresh. Muthu, are you listening to
I'm
this?
just checking it out. So he won't be able to speak. Either he can raise the hand. We are unmuting him. So what you rightly said, Justice Mushtaq is an expert in space and telecommunication.
That's right.
As private international law and alternative disputes. He is also a trained mediator. And he has presented papers on International Astronomical Congress held in Hyderabad, Korea and Italy. And he is also managing director of the online news. That's all we will be posting in the groups today because tomorrow is coming. You're right. We had also seen that.
You can pick his brains on all these subjects, apart from what he is speaking on tomorrow. He's a very.
We have unmuted him.
Yes, sir. Thank you for your
Muthu,
yes, kindly come on the video.
So my video, seems to be some problem with my video. Therefore,
That's
I'm only able to connect through audio. Thank you so much for your kind words, sir. It was my pleasure to help you prepare on this topic.
So
Thank you then.
The fact that a young lawyer researches such, and that is why they say that a young lawyer and senior or a designated senior, they are 2 wheels of the same vehicle and they work in an oiled manner once they work in tandem. Thank you everyone and thank you Muthu. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.